In this episode, we're talking with John Minn, the New South Wales Strata and Property Services Commissioner, and we're going to explore how the Office of Fair Trading goes about regulating an industry with such a poor reputation for ethical practice. Sales agents are pretty much always under fire for underquoting. Property managers aren't the flavour of the month either, as they struggle to navigate the demands created by a chronic rental shortage. Strata managers have been busted for double dipping and conflicts of interest have been exposed. And don't get me started on the rise of inexperienced buyers agents who are exploiting a licensing loophole. Our Commissioner has a big job ahead of him, and today we're going to find out what his agenda is and how he aims to go about fixing this situation.
Welcome to The Elephant in the Room. This is the podcast where we love to talk about the big things in property that never usually get talked about. I'm Veronica Morgan, real estate agent, buyer's agent and buyer's agent mentor, co-host of Foxtel's Location Australia, author of Auction Ready and co-host of Your First Home Buyer Guide.
And I'm Chris Bates, mortgage broker, recently ranked number 5 in Australia out of over 18,000 brokers in the annual MPA Top 100 Mortgage Broker Awards. Before we get started, I need to let you know that nothing we say here can be taken as personal advice. We always recommend you engage the services of an appropriate and experienced professional.
Our guest today is John Minn. For over 30 years, John has been deeply involved in the Australian residential property sector. As a business owner, practitioner and thought leader, his diverse experience includes residential sales, project marketing, residential property management, the rapidly evolving strata sector, franchising, digital innovation and nationally accredited professional development and training enterprises. So he's really crossed the gamut in his professional career before joining government. And now as Strata and Property Services Commissioner, John brings this extensive resume to the critical challenge of raising performance benchmarks in consumer experience and protection. His vision for an empowered, accountable and trusted sector can only be delivered through increased confidence and transparency and capitalising on the opportunities brought by change innovation. Now, all music to our ears. We love the sound of the vision that you have for the sector, John, and thanks so much for coming along to speak with us today.
It's great to be here, although I think you just made my job sound a lot harder than I thought it was. So let's see how we go.
Hopefully we'll make it sound even harder as we get to the end of this interview.
We had David Chandler on here. I think it was very early days when he started in the role, to be honest. I can't actually remember when the date was. I probably should have checked. But he was a character and he had some big plans. And he's changed the industry. I mean, and you could really see his motivations. He was very passionate, which you obviously know. What's got you? I mean, you've come on from the agency side into this. That's kind of been your thing, I guess. What's got you to come onto the government side, and what's motivating you to really try to make a difference here?
Chris, I think this was the last place I expected that I would finish up. If I'm going to be entirely honest, in fact, we just transitioned out of a business. As you would know, it takes 12, 18 months to run an appropriate succession plan and be able to move on. So I just got to the point in my life where I was just enjoying dabbling with a whole bunch of things, PropTech wise, industry wise, quite enjoying it. So I was as surprised as anyone when a recruiter rang me up and said, would you be interested in working for the government? So I think the immediate answer to that was no. Why would that be the case? But I think what ended up happening was I was convinced, on a couple of fronts that this was worth considering. One, that there was an appetite for it. Two, that in New South Wales they had a thing called a Department of Customer Service, which I thought that's very much central to what's necessary is improving experiences across the board. And the third one was, there may be an opportunity to make a difference, to give something back to an industry that I've known and loved for a long period of time. So on that basis, I took a deep breath and took the plunge.
And so it's the issues you thought, because it's always right, there's a perception and there's a reality, right? So when you've come into the role, is it what you expected it to be, or are the issues you're finding and uncovering and the stage you're unturning way bigger? And are you starting to see some green shoots, or is it still too early?
Yeah, look, all good questions. I guess when I'm thinking about it, I don't think there's much that's changed in my view of the challenges, where the problems lie, where the opportunities lie. One thing I've said on a number of occasions is that any industry that doesn't provide great experiences to its end consumers has got a real risk of irrelevance in a relatively short period of time. So to me, it is about working with leaders in the sector, working with consumer advocates, working with regulators to say, how does this look if things are going great? So what we're seeing and what we're looking hasn't much changed. We've probably rationalised it down to 3 really key areas that we want to be working on. The first of those, I think, is essential inward looking for government is regulatory practice reform. There are areas that can and should be done differently, with the appropriate level of resourcing to be able to back that up. And what I'm talking about there is just ensuring that we're actually focused on potential consumer harms, that we're not getting too caught up on the technical details or things that are tick box exercises, that we're trying to go places and have an impact which makes a difference.
Yeah.
Great thing in regulatory practice reform is it's got really strong support from right across the sector. Industry leaders, consumer advocacy leaders, government. Everyone's looking at it and saying, if we could just do something to get rid of that bottom 5 or 10% of people who are bringing it down for everybody else, that there's a chance, to the earlier point that you made, that the industry becomes more trusted. And that's so essential in transactions of the size and volume and scope that we deal with here. So that one is a really important one. But the other 2 that we've channeled it down to now are professional standards reform. So what does that look like? Do we have people filling the roles of the future as well as the roles of the present? What does that look like for licensing? And what does that look in terms of minimum standards that consumers would expect when they're dealing with professionals in a sector? And of course, that big one that you referred to is strata reform. And from my perspective, there remains issues from end to end of the strata life cycle, from the time a project is maybe a glitch in a developer's eye all the way through to the time that strata spend renewal might need to happen. There's things that we can do better at pretty much every stage of the journey.
You've got a very big job, right? And also with the housing shortage never being far from the news, and strata managers obviously recently making headlines for all the wrong reasons, how do you balance fighting fires with developing long-term strategy in this space and keeping that focus on those 3 core areas?
One thing, obviously, I can't afford to do is, given the scale of the industry, get too caught up on the front line of firefighting. And New South Wales Fair Trading plays a really critical role in being that interface. Our office has moved into the New South Wales Fair Trading environment. We weren't originally, so we're now within that environment, and I think that's really important because there are some great people in there with an appetite to try and get out and make a difference. We're just working through what the implications are from some additional resourcing out of the budget and what that's going to look like. But ensuring we've got an end-to-end process and increased transparency and better experiences on the regulatory front means that I can actually start to concentrate on some of the more strategic stuff, some of the larger issues that are there. And for the same reasons, engaging with industry, having these sort of conversations and engaging with all of the other stakeholders that actually impact the journey that consumers go through. So it's entirely possible to do all of that. But there's 61,000 licensed agents in New South Wales. There's nearly 90,000 strata schemes. There's 950,000 residential leases. There's a lot of stuff going on. Clearly, what I'm not going to do is step into the middle of every argument or every dispute that erupts amongst all those people.
I mean, you've got a lot of different stakeholders, right? Like you just mentioned there. I mean, you've got the investors, then you've got the people who probably have a certain, then you've got people in those buildings. Some are owner occupiers, some are investors, and you've got the renters, etc. Is it whereabout? I know in terms of those stakeholders, are you finding any issues that it's in certain pockets and certain buildings, or is it, where are you finding the biggest pushback, I guess?
Are we talking strata, Chris? Is this where the questions?
Yeah, strata.
New South Wales has got, when New South Wales invented strata in 1961, for the world. So what that ultimately means is we've got the oldest strata schemes in the world, and there's a series of issues that clearly emerge as a result of that. Used to be pretty easy back in 1961 because buildings were smaller, they didn't have too many facilities, they weren't overly complicated. And when people wanted to do a strata meeting, they could probably do it in the car park. Everyone knew each other, and they probably had a higher degree of trust and a much higher degree of understanding about what it means to live there. So what's happened, of course, is buildings have got more complex. They've also got older, and many of those emerging issues where people need to be more competent, are now important. You didn't actually need to understand strata law to live or own in strata back in the 1960s and 1970s. Now you probably do. Still regarded now as that fourth level of government. And we have people, and most of us, when we first buy into strata, we are actually incompetent. We're used to a house, we're used to a block. Now we think we've just bought 4 walls and we've got a car park somewhere around the building, and that's all we have to worry about. But we don't realise we're now responsible for the roof leak in the building next door. And it's ensuring people understand that and make good strategic, intelligent decisions around preventative maintenance, defect management, and all of those sort of investments in maintaining and enhancing the quality of their asset that become incredibly important. And they're the sort of things that we need to deal with better now.
Because that's the thing too. It's not just their awareness of strata law that they need to have now. It's really their awareness of how to run a building, from a asset management sort of perspective, particularly with these larger schemes, that's for sure. Now, from the outside looking in, I often wonder how our regulators manage this tension between protecting consumers, ensuring professional standards are being enforced in the industry, and the political machinations that I'm sure are running underneath the surface. Now, let me give you an example. Underquoting, it's a topic very close to my heart. I was really privileged to be invited to a roundtable of yours that you hosted with industry leaders on this recently. Now, consumers hate underquoting. Every state and territory around has laws around this, and in New South Wales, new legislation was introduced back in 2016 because the government at the time wanted it to be seen to be doing something about it, right? And much of the legislation, that legislation in particular, is quite impractical and not working, right? You know my views on that. And your office, your office has to, enforce those laws, right? And still, that legislation in particular has failed to deal with the issue. Underquoting persists, making your office look like a toothless tiger, and that has been a descriptor used many times. I've used it myself. And that's obviously a difficult position to be in when you don't have the right tools for the job, right? So how do you go about, and that's just one example, that's an enormous task really of affecting change under those circumstances. You've got legacy, you've got an industry that to some degree might resist change. You've got consumers demanding one thing that's completely at odds with what the industry asks for. And you've got a lot of people in the industry that would actually like to not underquote, but feel compelled that they have to because there's a huge element of the industry that persists in doing so. That's challenging. So as you're there, you're the commissioner, you're the boss of the regulator. How do you go about something as complex as that, juggling all those stakeholders?
Firstly, I'm not looking shocked about the fact you raised underquoting, Veronica. So,
promise this will be the only question underquoting.
that was one of the critical things, and thank you for being part of that roundtable. I think it was a really valuable event. I'll leave the politics for the politicians. I don't think that's a valuable area to play in. Although I will note that very often legislative change is driven, often as a result of a small or large cohort of people in a particular area doing the wrong thing, and therefore the belief that it needs to be controlled. My view may slightly differ from yours, is that I think legislation is a terrible tool to improve performance. The principles our office is trying to operate on are that we want an empowered, accountable and trusted property services sector. And that means everybody involved in the process. It means the regulator, it means industry practitioners, it means consumers can feel empowered themselves in order to be able to go out there and confident that when they're dealing with someone that they're getting good information and professional service. So when we talk about underquoting, there are things I'm optimistic about. Let me start on those because they're not necessarily the way you've couched a lot of this. I think there is a genuine belief amongst leadership in industry. I think technology providers are starting to come on the journey. The regulator and consumer groups, saying we actually want to get rid of this. And one of the best things that would happen for the majority of really good agents out there who want to do the right thing is that they're not competing on some sort of unlevel or perceived unlevel playing field with people who are deliberately going out there and being dishonest or misrepresenting things to consumers. And that's the issue here. This is not a question of pricing. It's purely about misrepresentation and dishonesty. So I think there's a view and a belief amongst the majority of agencies. I know a number of buyers advocates categorically disagree with me about that statement, but I'm very happy to go out there and say the majority of agents would actually like to have a level playing field, a professional approach to this, understand what the rules are, but also if they're going to be looking effectively after owners of properties and buyers of properties, and we're going to have an industry that's going to be profitable and professional and successful into the future, it requires consumers to be confident that there's good decisions being made. So I think there's some green shoots there. That said, I also have a belief that there are agencies out there who are systemically or systematically underquoting because they believe that that's what they need to do in order to maximise the level of commission that's coming into their business. And for whatever reason, they are creating a playing field that is unfair to buyers. It's costing some consumers a lot of money for a property they never had a chance of buying in the first place. And it's also leading to this corrosive nature of a market where you maybe, as you said, get a bit of a follow the follower situation happening where agents feel the only way they can compete is to replicate some of that behaviour. So, yes, we want to be able to do something about it, but it's a question now of what the plan is.
It's interesting because, I mean, we have had that conversation around is legislation required. Now, I'll hark back to 2003, and you'll no doubt remember that changed auction legislation that came in New South Wales anyway. And the reason I refer to that, and I know a lot of our listeners say, don't make all this just about New South Wales. So, I mean, a lot of these principles apply elsewhere, let me tell you. But in New South Wales back in 2003, we had a change of legislation around auctions. That's when the registration to bid at auction came in. There was a whole bunch of, there was underquoting changes, the quoting processes, et cetera, et cetera. And in particular in that case, that tackled dummy bidding, because dummy bidding was widespread before then. And agents that, again, similarly, agents that would probably prefer not to have used dummy bidders felt that they sort of needed to because, all around agents were doing it. So you had agents that will habitually do it and still do to this day, but they are the absolute minority rogue. Everybody else stopped doing it and started learning better skills. They started learning how to negotiate with one buyer, how to orchestrate a pre-auction offer if you only got one buyer, and that's where the transparency from a buyer's perspective, vanishes. So there was a change up gear, if you like, of skills in practitioners at the time, and that's why I think that a better underquoting legislation could potentially lead to that as well, because I know that there is a will out there with a lot of agencies to have a situation where underquoting is absolutely a really clear minority and they really stick out, a bit like dummy bidders nowadays. And it's really been stamped out of the industry. So I have hope, I guess, from that point of view. But I do, I'm a pragmatist as well. I know that you're in a government organisation now, but previously you're in private industry, you run your own business. There's a lot more agency that you have, when you're running your own business to affect change and get things done, as opposed to now you're learning, I imagine you're on your own steep learning curve and learning a whole bunch of new skills. How, as somebody from corporate, if you like, or from industry, coming into a role where you've really got to navigate and slow everything down, I would imagine nothing happens quickly. How do you sort of go about making things happen? I mean, I can imagine myself probably grinding to a halt and just sort of freaking out, not knowing how to manage it. I can't change anything. I can't get any decisions, it'd be pretty frustrating.
I think firstly, some things probably don't change. The skills that can help you be successful in one area are very often transferable. And I suspect one of the key reasons why I was asked to consider taking on a contract with government of this nature was because somewhere in my phone. Most people in the industry, were one or two phone calls away. So that enabled me to know where to find people, to engage with the right people, and to have some of the conversations. Doesn't mean that we're going to agree on everything. Doesn't mean I'm going to be popular 50% of the time or more. But it certainly means that the relationship is deep enough to be able to have the hard conversations when they're needed. So I think that's an important first step here. And whether we're dealing with underquoting, strata, or any of the other key issues in the market, they're things that we need to be able to do. What I have been particularly impressed by is the calibre of the executive quality within government, and very often with fairly limited resources to be able to take on some of these challenges. And when we talk about what's the difference between legislation and really visible, strong regulatory presence, I'd go for the second one almost every time. And the reason for that is that the laws are the laws. At the end of the day, I think there's things that could be tweaked, could be fixed, but businesses and industry and practitioners figure out a way to work legally within any system, and they can do it pretty effectively. The difference is if there are some of those systemic underquoters, for example, who are saying, we don't think anyone's going to catch us. There isn't a strong regulator looking over our shoulder, and we're not going to get caught. Then
the fines are really cheap, and they just think it's a cost of doing business.
Yep. That's also the case. That cost of doing business thing is a really scary concept, isn't it? And that shouldn't be the reason to do the right thing. Or just get away. You do the wrong thing. Instead of a small fine, I'll just run the risk. So look, from my viewpoint, one of the things that would probably be good to see is if there is a really significant case identified that is ultimately prosecuted, rather than perhaps necessarily just handed a penalty infringement notice at some stage, that's something that we should all be talking about, because it does a couple of things. One is it says there is a real risk here that if I'm doing the wrong thing, I'm going to get caught. And the second part of that is courts obviously have the ability to impose significantly higher pecuniary penalties, but there's also the ability to be more public with the outcomes, to provide really good education back to the sector and back to consumers about what to look for, what to do, and how best to play it. And if it doesn't take much for an agency to realise if we haven't got people doing the wrong thing, everyone starts doing the right thing, that confidence is going to increase. And we're seeing that in a number of areas at the moment. It is beyond me. One of the reasons underquoting has probably increased is because agents are confusing the ability to run an auction campaign and the ability to get people to turn up and bid with a genuine skill in being able to negotiate effectively, perhaps with the only buyer that's available. So there are some areas where negotiation has really gone backwards on the back of a market that's been undersupplied significantly for a long period of time. There's very often more people than you need to buy a property, and whether they buy at auction or shortly afterwards, the clearance rate of properties overall is very, very high in the market at the moment. What would fix a significant part of the problem is if we went back 10 or 15 years to a market that was perhaps oversupplied, where you had to work really hard with every listing you had. It wasn't necessarily going to sell just because you had it on the market. And you needed to deal with the fact that what you were expecting to get, what the owner was expecting to get, and what everyone was hoping for may not be achieved, and that the buyers were very much in control. Now, we haven't got that many agents in the last few years who've had to deal with those circumstances.
Yeah, it's funny that actually that's 2017, 2018, the last time we dealt with those conditions. And you're absolutely right. And you do see an exodus of agents, the fair weather agents in those times as well, because it does come down to those who are able to develop those genuine skills. Now, I mean, interestingly enough, you mentioned technology, you've played in the PropTech space, and there's been a lot of, attention and attempts to develop PropTech solutions to this perception of lack of trust. When I say perception, there is a lack of trust, but it's not always lack of trustworthiness. I think the agents, and it's a whole topic for another conversation around real lack of trust or untrustworthiness versus perceived untrustworthiness, and that's a totally different issue. But there is that out there, and there's a lot of people in the PropTech space that aren't necessarily from a real estate background, and yet they're sort of, from fintech or whatever they're from. They have an experience, they have one experience trying to buy a property and go, oh, Maggie, I've got a solution for this. And I hear and I see these solutions and I just think, yeah, sure, that will go to rubble, that won't survive. Because I think they misdiagnose the problem. I think there's this assumption that the only people that can't be trusted in real estate are the sales agents, where in fact, buyers can't be trusted, neither can vendors. I mean, nobody is really operating in a very trustworthy way wholly in the property transactions. But do you see, because you probably have a somewhat similar cynical view to a lot of these solutions that I have, do you see any real, I guess, glimmers of hope in it? Or you may not be a glimmer of hope if you're a salesperson, but do you see any real opportunities in the PropTech space where you think, you know what, actually there's going to be some technology that comes along and really does disrupt the sector because it can do a better job because somebody has actually properly diagnosed the problem and come up with a really good solution?
Well, firstly, there's only really one area where that example's ever been true, and that's the oldest form of PropTech effectively there is, and it's the portals that are out there at the moment, the realestate.coms of the world, who effectively are owning more and more of the transaction in reality in terms of the fees that they're charging, what people are paying to use it, and they're continuing obviously to bolster it, very high capitalisation. So and that's what we'd probably regard as Gen 1 PropTech as a better description. Look, I take your point about the fact that someone who's had a really bad experience as a tenant thinks, well, we can design an app that will fix all of that, and it usually doesn't work on that basis because it can't. And part of the reason it can't is PropTech is a lot harder than it looks. You can't borrow money for it. You're certainly not against it. You could mortgage your house, or you can go out and do multiple rounds of capital raises. And so it's actually a hard road to get to the point where your subscriptions are high enough to provide a value of the business and to produce a worthwhile income. So harder than it looks, and it means that a lot of those sort of solutions really don't ever emerge too significantly. The other thing that hasn't happened in the real estate and property and strata space is there's been billions and billions of dollars spent, $20 billion a year in PropTech, a lot more in fintech, to try and come up with solutions that will actually disintermediate real estate agents and others from the process. And strangely enough, they've never worked. Two reasons. One is people are scared. This is high emotion, high value. We want someone we can trust to help us go on the journey when we're engaged in those transactions. So people are still important. But the other thing that I think is often ignored with transactions in the property space is they're quite complex. They go for a long period of time. There's probably 150 odd different touch points in a rental transaction or a sales transaction from the time a property is listed through to the time someone moves in and gets the keys. Pretty hard to disintermediate or disrupt an entire transaction like that in an effective way. So I have a very strong belief in the power of technology to increase transparency, to reduce friction, to provide great experiences for people. But what I've seen being successful is the technology that actually enables great performance from real estate agents, that saves time for a consumer or saves money somewhere along the process, doesn't try and be the process itself, because usually it can't, but it just enables high performance in all those different bits along the way. And it's that type of technology that I think we're really looking for.
It's interesting, actually, because I'm launching next month or whenever this goes to air, a property management business. So I've resisted it for a long time, but now I've got a really good business partner in this space. It's preferential if anyone wants to know. And we've been looking at software solutions to start from scratch with, from using a great marriage of tech and human interaction and human care, and really look at property management from a different angle. and from the ground up. And it is really interesting because there's a lot of options out there in the property management space and so my business partner was in property management some years ago. And so obviously she's upskilling there and saying, well, there's huge leaps and bounds in what's improved the efficiency. So therefore that should translate, if it translates properly, into a better consumer experience. Whether it does or not, that's, yet to be seen. I guess you would argue that in many cases it hasn't been. It might have improved efficiencies, but it hasn't actually translated to the end consumer. And certainly we're looking at it with some excitement because there's lots of things that we can utilise, but we don't want to take out that personal touch. And certainly I would say the strata management side of things, that would be ripe for it. I know that you've got moves afoot for mandatory digitalisation of data. I mean, I cannot believe the sector hasn't grabbed that with both hands and just said, yes, this is really going to help us. Let's just forget our clients even for a minute, But like I've got one strata investment property, and I was sent this login for the portal, and I got in there and went, great, well, I've got a question about some works that are going on in the building. I'd like to know, what's the time frame on this? So where in the portal can I actually post a question? Nowhere. And where in the portal can I find out who my strata manager is, because it changes all the time? Nowhere. So I then send them an email, the old-fashioned way to go, it's great that you've got this technology now, but the technology can do so much more than you got. You give them his login and it's useless. All I can see is when my strata levies are due. That's all I can see. I knew that because I already paid I always pay them. I don't need to log in to see that. It's sort of fascinating that, that it taken this on, but then still absolutely put a big gate in place and said, well, you can't access anything beyond that. It just makes me laugh, really.
Yeah, she raised a pretty good point. So a couple of important things. One is the foundations for any system, particularly one that takes on 89,000 strata schemes and community schemes in New South Wales. You actually have to get the basics right. And to a really significant degree, the basics are right. But there is an issue that right at the moment, what Strata Hub is doing is essentially charging people, $3 per lot in order to report to the government. That's not actually delivering on the promise that you've spoken about in relation to, front door for resources, easy access to, emergency services, all the other things that should be there. And ultimately, of course, what we want it to be is a really strong data tool so we can start to benchmark right across the sector and have a really good understanding of what's there. In good news, there was $3.5 million in the budget this year to move to the next stage of enhancements of Strata Hub, and I'm very excited that that's the case because we can now mobilise the team around starting to build out some of that. And our intention is that at least half of what needs to be done in that next stage of build is user experience improvements, consumer value, consumer education returns, as well as getting the basic infrastructure and the basic program working more and more effectively, making it easier to report, making it easier to get information in and out of the system. So it's a big undertaking, and it was quite a visionary undertaking at the time that it was launched. And the Owners Corporation Network, of course, were actually they're a strong advocate for it for a long period of time, and we're probably one of the big reasons, in the public world and the consumer world why it happened. So I think that's particularly encouraging. I can tell you one thing we're about to relaunch again within the next couple of months is there was a Strata Living Guide that dated back to about 2016, 2018, which people found quite useful. And the reason they found it useful was it was effectively the idiot's guide to strata. It's me or you or anyone else. What does it mean? Who are all the players? How do they work together? Well, it was older legislation, wasn't fit for purpose, couldn't have been relaunched now, but we're very close now to having a new, accessible, up-to-date version of that out, which at level one, would help anyone just to take a deep breath and say, now I get what it is that I'm living in. Now I get what it is that I want to buy. And if I've got deeper questions, there will be links through to that that they'll be able to access, and that will be accessible through Strata Hub as well as other areas within government. So I agree with you. We can do better, but I am very, very confident based on the foundation that's there at the moment that, having that will enable us to do that. If we didn't have it, then you'd be waiting another 2 or 3 years to see any of those things happen.
I'm on a personal mission to help more people make better property decisions. And you can find out all about what I'm working on at veronicamorgan.com.au. And there you'll find resources for first home buyers, details about my buyer's agent mentoring program, access to suburb help for investors, or if you're looking to buy your dream home or an investment property in Sydney's inner west, eastern suburbs or lower North Shore, you can connect with my team at Good Deeds Property Buyers.
If you're thinking about buying your first home, upgrading to a new one, or purchasing an investment property anywhere in Australia, we would love to carefully guide you through this journey and importantly get the finance right. Please reach out via our website, wealthful.com.au.
John, do you think that a lot of this, what's motivating the government, is it the move to more and more owner-occupiers and, the challenges that they have within buildings? Is it just the rise of strata in particular, as a segment, and a number of dwellings across the state is going to naturally be where a lot of our new property, comes from, rather than sort of greenfield and house and land packages, etc.? How's the government sort of, thinking about this? And are they trying to get ahead of the curve and say, look, obviously more and more people are living in strata. If we don't get on top of this now, it's just going to grow into a much bigger problem. Is that how, what's motivating the government to really take action now?
Yeah, Chris, strata, confidence is fundamental to confidence in the entire residential property sector in New South Wales. It's as simple as that, and Australia. I don't think we can look at it any differently. We've not only got cost of living pressures at the moment, but as everyone's aware, even if you were living under a rock, and maybe you have to because there's not enough accommodation, we've got a housing supply problem. We've got an affordability challenge. And this is the nature of probably 20 years worth of evolution of the property market in most different areas. Strata is actually, and community living is going to be a really significant part of that solution. And it's going to be a very high percentage of that solution if we're ever going to solve for affordability, housing supply, and ultimately, social and economic well-being, revolves around a healthy market with confidence in it in property. And without strata, we can't have that. We're expecting 50% of Greater Sydney to be living in strata within the next 15 years. That's a fairly tight time frame. That's moving from 1.2 million-ish people at the moment to maybe 3 million. 3 million over that period of time. That's a really substantial number. And to get that right, we not only need to get the building right. You referred to the building commissioner early on and the great work that's been done there to increase confidence, in the sector, and removal of combustible cladding, reduction in defects, getting rid of some of the difficult developers. What we don't want to see happen is all that good work go to waste because people can't be confident after they move in that a building is going to maintain its asset value and maintain its integrity after that. And that could be destroyed within 3 to 5 years if the decisions are not made correctly at the first AGM. So we need to get all of that stuff right. But strata is immensely important. And in fact, I'd go as far as to say it is the most important part of the market if we're going to have confidence in 5 or 10 years' time.
It's very interesting. Now, while we got you here in the hot seat, the pathway to becoming a buyer's agent, this is very dear to my heart. I'm sure that you're aware of the shortcut that many new entrants to the industry are taking. So I have a question for you around automatic mutual recognition. Why is the automatic mutual recognition of licensing from other states with less stringency licensing processes, and I'll just point directly to Queensland here, why is that allowed in New South Wales? We upped and increased our licensing process, the work experience involved, etc., some years back, and yet we have a steady flow of new entrants and let's not even get into the fact that that's not enough for new buyers agents, by the way, that's a separate topic. Why are we allowing that? Why is it so easy for people to backdoor it via Queensland?
Well, I think there's two parts to the answer to that. The first one is New South Wales at this stage hasn't adopted automatic mutual recognition at all in the property services space. So it's not here at the moment. Other states have, but New South Wales hasn't. Beyond that, though, mutual recognition is actually a federal initiative designed to mean that if you hold the same class of licence in one jurisdiction, you can apply under mutual recognition and will automatically be granted in another one. So it's not whether New South Wales wants to do it or not. It's actually a requirement if the licence class is equivalent, that people will be granted that mutual recognition. From my perspective, what I would like to see, and there's a few initiatives around that, is firstly that to a significant degree, I think we didn't get the 2020 reforms to educational standards for licensing quite right. I think there's the ability to improve on what's there, and I think there's certainly the ability to start to say what are the roles we want to see in the future. It's not necessarily more units of competency. It's how do we properly enable and empower specialisation and people to be dealing in the areas that they need to be dealing with, and buyers advocacy may well be one of those key areas. The second thing is, because the qualifications themselves are accredited nationally, and ASQA is obviously the organisation charged with compliance, regardless of where someone's coming from, if they do a qualification, they've got the appropriate certificate, they've got that bit of paper in their hand, then they will get granted a licence, because we can't determine necessarily the quality of the training organisation that supplied it. And I have serious concerns that there are organisations out there at the moment who are shortcutting the system, competency-based training, which is supposed to be about training people how to operate on the job highly effectively, make a difference and protect consumers, isn't always the case. That pragmatic approach of what's the quickest, easiest way that I can get this bit of paper so I can go out and be a real estate agent or a buyer's advocate or a stock and station agent or a strata manager, that's not a good environment for us to be working in. So, we are certainly going to look into things like perhaps licensing exams in the future, where worst case we can say to someone applying for a license, the last step before it's granted in New South Wales is you'll need to complete this exam. Or alternatively, if you've already got a license, one of the things we might say is as part of CPD next year, you actually need to complete your Class 2 or your Class 1 licensing exam. They're the sort of things that can and should be possible. Now, that's going to require change around regulation, or legislation in order to enable that to happen. But I think anyone who cares about real estate, strata managing agency, business broking, or any of these areas, anyone who cares about them as a profession that needs to be trusted will want to see higher standards, will want people to have a minimum standard before they turn up and you get loose on the unsuspecting public. And they're the type of things that I do think we need to be thinking about in the future. We can't solve for mutual recognition, but what we hopefully can solve for is minimum licensing standards in any jurisdiction. And from my viewpoint, New South Wales is really important.
Yeah, it's interesting that because, like for example, in Queensland, they don't have to even finish a full diploma to get a Class 1 licence. They can just do one subject. Whereas in New South Wales, not only do you do the full diploma, you've got to have 2 years work experience. So you can certainly see those who want to sort of profit from advocating shortcuts and getting into the market quicker would do that. It just seems like a no-brainer from their point of view. They go, well, why would you do it the hard way if you can do it the easy way? So you can sort of get that. The problem is, of course, consumers, and certainly when it comes to buyer's agents, the Certificate 4, which is your sort of starting qualification, if you like, that doesn't cover anything about due diligence. And to give you an example, at least you learn what the prescribed documents are to be in a contract in, say, New South Wales or Victoria. You go to Queensland, where there's been new legislation, but currently hasn't been implemented. There's almost zero prescribed documents. And so a buyer's agent who knows New South Wales, even if they know it in a very basic sense, which most do because they don't learn due diligence, they go to Queensland, just assume that you get all the same information. And Queensland's a state, it's a buyer beware state where basically people do their due diligence after they've already signed a contract. I mean, it's in like a way they're cooling off rights and they can do all sorts of crazy things. So you can see it's sort of interesting. The federal government says, you should be able to reward, make it easier to transfer from one state to another. But the actual legislation on how the markets operate is so fundamentally different in every state. So it's sort of scary in a way that the federal government has mandated that you should make that passage of qualification grease the wheels, if you like, from one state to another. So I'm pleased to hear that you're really aware of it and you're trying to work, you're trying up, you're looking at workarounds. I laugh, but I'm horrified at the same time.
Wouldn't national licensing be a good thing?
Yes, as long as it didn't go to the lowest common denominator.
But that also is an interesting question, isn't it? Because sometimes if you set a bar too high for entry level, we don't actually bring in good assistant agents, assistant property managers and others who can actually train and be mentored by an experienced agent and build up their qualifications. Yeah, the world is not one these days, where you finish a qualification and you're never going to have to study again. In fact, continual lifelong learning is fundamental, I think, to any of us. And if you're not passionate about that, you probably shouldn't be going into any form of business because you're going to fail within a short period of time. So we've got to deal with that as an issue as well. I think there are examples in Australia where the entry level standard has been set too high. And the downside of that is that when it's too high, and it then becomes really hard to recruit appropriate qualified people for the industry. We get this dog-eat-dog world of trying to poach people off someone else rather than develop really good future professionals. And I think that's a bit of a barrier to getting great people into the industry. The second thing that happens, you'll get the lowest class of registered training organisations saying, we'll find you a cheap, quick, easy way to get your qualification. We don't actually learn what a trust account is, and you don't.
We have that.
I know.
We have that. The thing too about that low barrier to entry, I mean, in New South Wales, of course, you do your 5 core subjects you've cert for, and you can then work as an associate agent. That's your pathway in, and you have to work for a licensed agent, and then you have to work in a sales and property management environment. You don't get the rogue traders in those environments that you do with buyer's agency, because the buyer's agent wants to run their own show, which means they want to start. They don't want to start as an assistant and work their way up through the industry. They want to start as a business owner. And that's the problem. You've got people setting up businesses with the appropriate qualifications and yet none of the experience and none of the skills. And so it's a very different type of person, and it's a very different type of setup. There's one provider of education, I'll use that term loosely, in this space that advertises that you only need a phone and a laptop, and that's sort of at its core, it's a industry, it's a cottage industry, it's full of one-man bands, and unfortunately, because there's only a handful of us compared to sales agents, in the whole scheme of things, no one's worried about it until something really bad happens. So I'm concerned for consumers there, and I'm also concerned for my industry, and that's my 5 cents worth that I've just had to chuck in there because I had you as a captive audience. Now, thank you for your patience with me, John, and I will never get off this bandwagon until things change. Do you have a property dumbo for us?
Yeah, look, I did give a little bit of thought to that. I got one serious one and then one about me. How would that be?
Go for it.
I just figured, since you raised underquoting, there's one area that is totally frustrating to me, and a really poor quality or low professional agents, it seems to think this is a rule. So when we're talking about dumbo moves, I think you're aware, as anyone is, that agents are required to review and amend their estimate, when they, based on feedback from the market amongst a whole bunch of other sources. And, relevant factors should be taken into account. Now, and obviously you can't continue to market a property at an estimated selling price you now know to be wrong. So the instance that, I have some concerns about, which just seems completely crazy to me, is that, agents who then receive an unconditional offer, from a buyer, with someone who's prepared to meet all the terms on the contract that they've got in front of them, they're prepared to sign and pay the deposit, that it is absolutely no defence for that agent to claim at that point in time that it's not an offer because the owner said they didn't want to consider offers. That's just blatant stupidity, and if we happen to be able to catch and prove that, it would not be a defence. So if there are real estate agents listening to this, and
that's a dumbo,
that's what you think, that is a genuinely dumbo situation. So
I'm going to put out there, in New South Wales, anybody comes across an agent that has done that, you put an offer down that has been a serious offer that you said, we can sign this contract with a 66W, say tomorrow for argument's sake, it's been rejected with that excuse that, the vendors told me not to submit offers and they don't adjust their quoting, let me know. I've got a direct line to John Minns and we're going to get that thing investigated. You heard it here.
John, I mean, it's a hard one though, right? Like it's you got from the agent's point of view, absolutely that's what they should be doing, but it could be early in a campaign, and they could be sort of trying to get enough interest in this property, and all of a sudden they get an unconditional offer, day one, right? And they put the guide at 2.3, and then they have to update their guide, right? That's the
remove a guide or
yeah, and so
no guide.
Then they have to update their guide, and then all of a sudden it's priced higher, and then people who haven't seen the guide been increased, and now going to start to think that it's going to go for a lot more because the price, the guide's increased. Like, how do you sort of, from a vendor's point of view, they were probably always sort of maybe not, willing to wanting to sell it for more than the guide. It's a hard one. Like, buyers might get frustrated with that, but then you can get done as a seller point of view because you want to use the same tactics that were used against you, right? So, and the agent's ultimately trying to get the best price for the vendor here. So and I understand that there's but there's just so many, people are frustrated when they're trying to buy. When you try to sell, you want to use the same tactics that they used on you, right? To get the best price. So how do you think you're going to tackle this, I guess?
Well, I think firstly that's an emotional reaction, and it's one that in the broad light of day doesn't make the level of sense that I think some people would have us assume that it does. So if we're at that point early in the campaign, as Veronica said, we don't actually have to provide a guide to market. We certainly have to adjust our estimated selling price, and we can't guide below that estimate. But here's the interesting thing, I think we've got an agent here almost failing negotiation 101 to start off with. Their job is to get the best range of possible buyers for that property who are real potential buyers who could afford to buy it and settle on the day of auction or before, or maybe shortly afterwards. It's not to get a whole bunch of people turning up who can't afford to buy it. And one of the real issues is if we were in a much more balanced market, or in fact an oversupplied market, and the best solution that I had to get a high value for an owner of a property as a real estate agent was to tell everybody that it was worth a lot less than the owner wanted for it, or I even thought it was worth, then I would actually be working dead against that owner. I'd have failed 101. I'm lying to buyers. I probably lied to the seller to get the property on the market in the first place. A professional agent does have the ability to sell to a single registered buyer, bidder at an auction, or to a single buyer, because absolutely we've still got to deal with the owner's expectations on one hand and the buyer's expectations on the other. That's the reality of life. That's the way buying and selling properties works. I'm not denying for a moment there's always a void between what the owner thinks they're going to get the first day that it goes to market and what the buyer thinks they're going to be able to buy it for the first time they see it. And it's the job of a professional negotiator. The job of a professional negotiator is to build trust, and you don't do that by being dishonest.
Bridging that gap, it's always fun and games. But I think that the thing is that consumers play a part in this as well, because consumers look at the agent who's quoting accurately and they go, oh, well, I'm not going to add 10%. No, I wouldn't pay that. So then they don't go for that property. Then that agent's, trying to run an auction with only one buyer because they quoted it accurately and all the buyers didn't believe them. Then afterwards they go, oh, I didn't realize I was only going to sell for that. Oh, well, you should have believed me because I tried to tell you. But all the other agents don't. So, but I think that's quite generational, in terms of a marketplace. There's buyers look for a short period of time. They became experts in that that market, that intense market that they're operating in that time. They get trained how to act in that time, and then they buy, then they're out of the market for 6, 10, 20 years, however long before they go and engage again. And in that time, I think you got one generation of buyers where you can start to retrain them as to actually what a price guide means and how to work with that. So, and also, at the end of the day, I think one thing we should remember is that buyers have to remember they're entering into a contract for a very significant amount of money for a significant asset that is potentially life-changing. And you know what? Take it seriously, buyers. Actually go and work out what that property is worth and make your own mind up. And, you know, I've got a mini course in Home Buyer Academy on teaches you how to price a property like a professional, right? Go and learn how to price that property or engage a professional will do it for you, not one of those buyer's agents that presses a button on RP data. You know, you need to take responsibility for what you're about to do. So whilst underquoting is close to my heart, I get annoyed by the practice of it. I also get annoyed by buyers who go, oh my God, I spent money on a building impairs inspection and I got ripped off because I believed the agent. It's like, work it out, people. Work it out how this market operates and learn the rules of the game before you play. There endeth the lesson. You had another personal dumbo for us, though, didn't you, John?
Well, look, I think just, as a buyer's advocate, you may appreciate the fact I've sold quite a number of properties over the years, so I didn't come down the last shower. I kind of figured that theoretically I should know a little bit about what I'm doing. So we just recently sold a property at auction, but before we did that, we purchased another one that we knew we needed to do a bit of renovating to it. It was all part of this new exciting journey. We bought that actually in a cold climate region, which was, obviously, that's all good. Not nice property, nice aspect, all of those wonderful things. What we didn't pick up until winter came along this year was the fact that the reverse cycle air conditioning that had been promised hadn't worked, I reckon, for about 5 years in the property.
Oh, right, yeah.
We didn't pick it up. We didn't recognise it. And now we've got to go through the process of obviously not only overcoming cold, but replacing it. Probably wouldn't have made a difference. Ultimately wouldn't have made a difference to our decision to buy. But there is a serious issue around this. Firstly, yes, we probably should have had a slightly harder look under the cover just to be really clear what we were buying. But I've also got, owners who, while they probably think, that was a good result for them because they've managed to move on, and they probably didn't feel they needed to disclose it. But as a pair of lawyers, I would have thought they probably could have done a somewhat better job of being honest. We wouldn't be sending business to them in the future. And the other thing is the agent who marketed the property, clearly asked the question, clearly promoted it with all this stuff in there, and grand scheme of things, that wasn't true. So,
check.
but I'm happy to out myself as a dumbo in that particular case, Veronica. It's just one of those things we continue to live and learn, and we talked about lifelong learning earlier. That's an ongoing lesson for me. Yeah.
And it is interesting, we talk to clients about, the appliances, and we sort of say, unless you literally go through checking everything, you don't know the dishwasher's going to work, you don't know all that stuff. And we do look at the bigger stuff, the really costly stuff, but often we don't look at the small change, do we? But I love the fact you've given us a personal dumbo. That's very humble of you, John. Thank you so much. And look, really appreciate you coming along. It's great to get insights into, what is changing in our industry. There's a lot happening in all of our states in the property sectors, and I guess we would like to extend the invitation to other commissioners in other states as well, and maybe some of the other ones in New South Wales to come on and have a chat about what's happening. So thanks so much for your time. Really appreciate it.
Yeah, no, thank you, Chris. Thank you, Veronica. It's been an enjoyable conversation.
Thanks so much, John. Cheers.
If you have a question that you'd like us to answer in an upcoming Q&A episode, you can send us a voicemail or written question via the website, theelephantintheroom.com.au, or you can email us directly at questions@theelephantintheroom.com.au. If you like what you're hearing, please share this episode with others you feel would benefit. And while you're at it, why not leave us an iTunes review? 5 stars would be great. I know that sounds a bit cringy, but we have it on good authority that every review helps make it easier for other people to find out about us and hear what our amazing guests have to say.